next 3 months as upcoming speakers. March 5th, Bob Garabedian, a veteran of the U.S. Army Air Corps, who's a P-40 and P-47 fighter pilot who served stateside in the U.S. during the war. April 2nd, Alan Shapiro, a veteran of the U.S. Army Air Corps. He was a C-47 pilot in the European theater, including the Dallam Bulge. And then May 7th, Bob Hartline, a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps. He flew fighter planes, including Corsairs in the Pacific Theater. Okay, so now for the main event, I'd like to introduce Kevin Springman, who will be introducing our very special guest. Seated in front of us, Bill Dallam. Bill was a U.S. Navy World War II and Korean War veteran. He served from 1943 to 1945 as a torpedoman on the USS, do you say Moale? How do you say that, Moale? And for his introduction again, I'd like to introduce Kevin Springman.
Can everybody hear me? Great. I'm Kevin Springman. I'm retired a couple of years from the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and I have a master's degree in clinical psychology from Duke University, and I'll tell you a little bit how that comes into play with World War II history. I served on the board of the Foreign Policy Association in Central Pennsylvania, and I volunteered at the War College International Fellows Program, joined the Heritage Foundation, and I went to a dinner for General Petraeus in October, and I came across Chris and Jeff, and we had a common history friend that told us about the history of the Civil War in Phillipsburg. And so a couple weeks later, I was visiting my mother's retirement home, and I came across Bill. He was just come back from the grocery store, and I asked him how old he was. Thanked him for his service. He said, I'm 99 years old. And I said, well, what do you attribute your longevity? Is it the food you're getting from the grocery store? Is it activity? He said, it's Eleanor Roosevelt. So that was the beginning of a very interesting discussion and understanding of World War II with Bill. It was kind of a synchronicity. I'll touch on that a couple of times, the concept of synchronicity. I went to obtain a picture of Bill in his apartment for the website, and I noticed a plaque on his wall that said that he had retired from the Department of Education also, with 37 years of service. So we got to talking, and here Bill retired in 1998 from the Department of Education as a federal program. So we had that in common. We started to talk about these strange coincidences that he has more than I've had in my life. He's going to talk a little bit about that then. And I got to realizing that this is what Carl Jung talked about in around World War II. He coined the term synchronicity to these multiple coincidences. And he worked with the head of the Duke Psychology Department, J.B. Ryan at the time. On the project, he wrote a treatise after the war and mentioned J.B. Ryan. So when I went to Duke, J.B. Ryan had there was a center that run by his daughter, and they got into some very deep things after the war. So I wanted to ask people, how many people saw the movie Oppenheimer? Quite a few. Now there's a reference in Oppenheimer to Carl Jung, and it's before he goes to visit Fermi, he pulls a book off his bookshelf. There's a Carl Jung book. Basically, it was a synchronicity with Fermi that they don't mention in the movie, where Fermi showed up at Einstein's doorstep looking for a job, and Einstein explained to him that we just couldn't get the fission reaction controlled, we couldn't get the energy staying in the fission reaction. And Fermi famously said, I just came from a pencil factory in Italy, and all you need is graphite. And so he built a full graphite structure with the control rods at the University of Chicago and was able to really get a head start on that controlling the fission reaction. So when Oppenheimer decides to go visit him, even though he's not supposed to visit him, that was based on that synchronicity. That's kind of a reference to that experience. So for those that don't know Young's experience in World War II, he was in Switzerland as a psychiatrist, and Alan Dulles and Paul Mellon visited him in Switzerland, and they wanted to recruit him for the OSS to make sure Heisenberg was having the same insights that Einstein and Fermi were having. So he worked with Paul Mellon to write psychological analyses of the Nazis, and Paul Mellon would transfer that to Eisenhower, and that's part of the way he contributed to the war effort. So I'm wearing my 1142 pin, for those of you who were here at the last presentation, because after the war, von Braun, who came through that program and became head of NASA, Einstein believed the synchronicities were connected to light communication. And von Braun funded the first psychoenergetics project that ended up being Project Stargate in the end, that's been declassified in the late 90s by President Clinton. So when I talked to Jeff and mentioned some of my background in this research, he said, well, you know, Dan Brown's new book, Secret of Secrets, has Stargate in it. So that was another little synchronicity. So I just wanted to share that with you, some of the psychological dimension to World War II. And without further ado, I'll introduce Bill, and he can tell you about his synchronicities, his amazing, not necessarily coincidences, but multiple connections, and his connection to the atomic bomb project and Eleanor Roosevelt. And I'll hand it over to Bill.
First thing I would like to do is to make it present to this organization of the full and complete record of the USS Moale, the ship that I served on in World War II. All the I'll have to speak. I'm 99 years of age, so I'm going to have to refer to some notes. I enlisted in the Navy, age 17, June of 1943. The reason was that I was attending the Louisville Technical High School because my father worked for DuPont and moved our whole family there. And I have no desire to learn about surveying. I was an avid reader and a listener and a wrestler. I was a champion wrestler at 85 pounds at Lansdowne High School, a district champion, and then the next year, 104 pounds. I tell you this to give you an idea of how small I really was. We enlisted, and they went to a movie the night before, and the movie was, I don't know the title of it, but it basically showed the Japanese overcoming the Americans in the Philippines, and there was one American left firing a machine gun. And the next morning, 6 of us from the school went down and enlisted in the Navy. And the Navy looked at us and gave us what they called an intelligence test, which basically was a vocabulary test. And could you add, subtract, multiply, divide? And if you could handle that, then they would place you. Well, I had some luck with that. And they assigned me as an apprentice torpedoman. And then they took me to a school outside of Milwaukee. And basically, we trained there for a few weeks, learning how to handle torpedoes. Well, when I came back to the ship. They sent us all to the USS Moale. And then one of the first things they were doing was trying out who could fit where. So they flew a balloon overhead and you got to fire at it. I was able to fire at it. I wore glasses, had braces on my teeth, weighed about 115 pounds. But because I could hit the balloon, they made me a gunner on a 20mm cannon on the fantail of the destroyer. A 17-year-old kid. And that was how we started out. And we went out for 4 or 5 weeks while they trained the crew and they organized us and they called us to the quarters so that we would know when they go, know all hands to battleship and so forth. And we went through the Suez Canal and headed out to Hawaii and joined the fleet. And then next thing I knew, we were part of a task group called Task Group 38. And we were basically moved on to 6 different invasions. So this particular ship had 6 battle stars for the battles that it was on. To be a young sailor on the ship, I was small. The heavier sailors took the bottom bunks. And the lighter sailors, we had to climb up to the top. And then before every watch, we started out, it was 4 on and 8 off. You had to get used to 4 hours duty and 8 hours off. And that was a little hard to get used to. They would come by and wake you up to make sure that you were doing that. Well, the torpedoman had what we considered a small advantage. We handled the torpedoes and we handled the alcohol that ran the engines for the torpedo. So when we would go on watch, we would have a cup of coffee and then pour a little torpedo alcohol in it. And we would have to go around and stand watch. Now, I stood watch on deck charges, on the port, starboard side, and back on my machine gun. It was a 20mm cannon. A 20mm cannon had a tall thing went up and down. And we had a hydrant operator that did that, and then another man who was a loader. And it was a 3-person thing. And my hands were out like this, and you turned the gun on, you just turned it and not turned the gun on. Every 3rd shell was a tracer. So they're basically firing at a Japanese plane. Basically, you fired 3 shells and you were a tracer, and you could then trace ahead and make sure that the plane ran into it. Now, all 3 guns were firing, twin 5-inch mounts were firing. They had shells that didn't have to really hit anything, but just get close to it, and then it would explode. And these ships, the USS Moale, was particularly designed to fight kamikazes. And I have a picture of that one here with the twin mounts. These were the first ships with twin mounts. Young sailors were treated rather quietly. We were allowed to do our jobs and we were told what to do, and we learned to follow instructions implicitly. And as soon as the captain would say, all hands, man your battleships, man your stations, we would rush out. Now, our seating quarters were just below where the gun was that I normally was a gunner. So if there were planes, then you might have to make a quick trip up. Otherwise, sometimes I just sort of sleep on deck. And that's a kind of life, a very quiet kind of life, very ordered. And you learn to obey orders. And that helped me the rest of my life. Because I ended up as a retired chief of federal programs in the Pennsylvania Department of Education, paying some $400 million a year for teachers to be teaching education advantaged children, buying books for them. We would buy books, we pay for the teachers, we pay for the reading teachers, and make sure that nobody misspent money. The Department of Education wanted veterans like us because we will consider to be very honest on that particular thing. And we took part as a ship, as a destroyer in a number of invasions. The Battle of Mormont Bay is the one that stands out most in my mind because we had gone in and basically we were assigned to kill a Japanese ship that was unloading Japanese sailors. So we got in, we saw the ship, and we were able to torpedo the ship, but at the same time, cannons from the shore were firing back at us. Three ships went in, and only two came out. The submarine was sunk. And we had about 300 sailors in the water there to make sure we could get them out. It was a very trying time. And basically, as we went back out at night, it was almost midnight, pretty fast because we thought the battle was over. And when you go fast on a destroyer at even speed, well, a kamikaze pilot saw that steam and started up and began firing right back up at us. And we fired back, and while we shot him down, my loader was mortally wounded and almost killed. And it was at that point that I said to myself, God, let me live through this night and I will become a good person. That was a defining moment in my life. The sailor, my loader, happened to be the son of a mafia chief. His father did not want him to enlist. And as he lay there, he said, Bill, tell Mary I love her. And for years I've been trying to find out who his sweetheart was. And it's been unsuccessful so far. My tunneling operator, the one that ran the gun up and down, was a farmer from South Carolina, and he was afraid. He quivered on the deck. And when we got back to Hawaii, basically they let him off the ship. And that kind of thing makes an effect on you because you become very independent, very strong. You know you have to do what you have to do. So basically, my experiences in the war dealt with, maybe a dozen kamikaze attacks where I was able to fire my gun along with all the other guns. And of course, one of the things that happened was the twin mounts of the 5-inch gun firing behind me, pointing primitive ray, were killing my ears, even though we were supposed to wear ears on. So as the years have gone by, my hearing has gotten worse. I'm wearing hearing aids now. And all I can really hear now are retired teachers who enunciate and nurses who enunciate. The rest of you, I have to say, speak more slowly. Let's see. I learned things in the Navy. When I was in the Navy, I was like everyone else at that time. I was a little nervous and afraid of black people. However, on one occasion, we were told to get off the ship. We had to go to an LST and get more shells because we run out of shells. So while we were unloading, a call came over. Return to the ship. We have a kamikaze coming. And as the youngest one, I was the last to get off. And the two ships came close together, and I was scared to death. I knew I had to jump. A black sailor reached over and grabbed me and pulled me to safety. My love, my change of viewpoint of black people changed completely. The black sailors were all on one row in the ship, and they served several guns. But after that, when we went to wash, and we washed on the deck for a bowl of water, I didn't invite them. Then I found out that the first class torpedoman that whose instruction tree had been found afterwards was a homosexual. He played none of that during the war. He directed us carefully, but he dressed very carefully, always shaved and looked very neat, and we followed his lead. But afterwards, he's a Harrisburg captain, so I'm not going to mention. And that's how I sort of found that out. And you find out all these things afterwards. I found out afterwards, for example, that the USS Moale and my family were the Moales and the Dallams were attorneys back in the Revolutionary War. So I really had a connection to the ship. And it turned out the lieutenant of the organization that I was representing was a second cousin. I didn't know this until after the war, and I started looking things up. They were very, very good to me all the time. I was very fond of the Moale and spent some years talking about it going around. I think most of what a sailor did, we obeyed orders, we learned, and this was inculcated in me. I was able to follow instructions carefully, and that helped me when I went to work for the Department of Education. And of course, because I was a veteran, when the war ended, we were in Japan, and the officer on the ship left the ship and they said, those of you that want to re-enlist now. The rest of you can leave and you can get discharged back to New York State. And they left. And we were stunned. I reached over and the captain had left his jacket. So I took the captain's jacket in my sea bag, and then I went out to try to hitchhike back from Seattle back to New York City. And you can imagine what that's like. A truck stopped, and the guy said, get in the back. He said, I'm taking my wife to the doctor for her baby, but I'll take it down to the... And that was the first step. And I was able to get on a plane. They didn't charge me on the plane because I was a veteran and carrying a sick bag. And I got back to Chicago, and when they charged me, I was able to call my sister, and she was able to confirm that she would pay for my thing. So I got on the train in Chicago, and I'm settled down, and as we're getting ready to leave, the guy who handles things came on and pulled the curtains down. Why are you pulling the curtains down? So I pulled my curtain up a little bit. I got there, this Winston Churchill saying goodbye to where he represented that part of his business. And we finally got back to Wilmington, Delaware, and basically my sister picked me up and brought me down to Wilmington. And we stopped at this gorgeous looking house and said, where are we going? He said, we're now living in Captain DuPont's cabin, favorite cabin. I said, why? He said, because your dad was a really big deal with the atomic bomb and the Hanford, Washington. He was one of the lead engineers. And DuPont was the one that had hired him. So they put us all up there for a short period of time. Alexander DuPont came over to say hello and everything. And my brother was back from the war. My two sisters were there with their pilot husbands. And we were able to talk to him, and I pulled the captain seat back out. I said, Mr. DuPont, we can have this for your organization. And he was so pleased. But I would never have been able to captain seat back because he was moving. And that was about 2 moving to Delaware. And basically then I had to find a job. The first job I could find was bellhop in a second-rate hotel in Wilmington, Delaware, catering to prostitutes and beer. I got on the bus, and in the Westchester State College, was going to a bar, passed some buildings on the left. I said, what's that? That's the Westchester State College. It's a beautiful women outside. They're living outside. So I got out and went down the bridge. And went in and I said, how do you get in here? And she looked at me, can you fill this form out somewhere? I filled the form out, and she said, Dr. Tice, come over here. We have somebody who could handle your wrestling team. And Dr. Tice came over, and he said, where did you go to school? Lansdowne. So they called the principal, and the principal said, yeah, he's a smart kid. Take him. I'm in. And I wasn't even a graduate. I hadn't even finished high school. So I took an English social studies major there. I was there for 4 years. And basically, the Korean War started, and I wasn't ready to get civilian yet, so I signed up again. We put on an aircraft carrier, USS Moale, and we went over to the Mediterranean. And we were cruising around the Mediterranean. And they made me an underwater torpedo, underwater mine. Basically, what we were doing secretly was laying mines at the port where we thought the Russians or other people might occupy. The mines could only be erected by a plane going or one crossing the city attack. But that's what the Moale was. That's what the USS was doing. So after about 15 months, and I didn't really miss that thing back. And I come back because now. And you don't want to go into the matter by report all the rest of the stuff. Because you want to hear what a sailor does. The Navy influenced me to act quickly and decisively at everything I do. Even coming here to talk. And then we write it down, make a few notes, which I can hardly see without time. And I think it's probably one of the best things that happened in my life. Although in our family, we were very quiet because my father was connected with the bombing of Hiroshima because of the materials they made. So we never talked about that at all. Went on to have a life. I was an accountant for a while, so I learned a lot about that. And then eventually I got tired of cheating people. I went up and became an English teacher at a place called State College Area High School. And in State College Area High School, they made me, because I had married and had children, they gave me all kinds of duties. I did the yearbook, I did the newspaper, I basically created the journalism class, coached wrestling, and assistant coach for the Homer Bar, who was really a good coach. I was allowed to coach the small kids because I knew talking about wrestling, and went on from there. And my life just sort of took over. It just went on, and everything for happening. I said to myself, half jokingly, Bill, I think you're the offense, you're being offense to the guardian angel. And I laughed about it. So I'm glad you got it. And I think that's the end of what I'm going to say. Thank you very much. My father, and I think I did say that Mr. President, a copy of this for the organization.
Everybody, is it on? Well, just give me a second. Oh. Hello, can you hear me? Go ahead. Okay, can you hear me now, ladies and gentlemen? Can you hear me now? Okay, so we're gonna take questions now, but, question and answer period. But I wanted to ask, Bill, thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask you, before we get to general questions, if maybe you can walk us through a little bit more about your combat experiences. I know that the USS Moale was off Iwo Jima and many other waters, and you served a lot of combat as a torpedo striker. And we loved hearing about your story about the 20mm story.
I won't
Can
be
you share a few more? Oh.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, can you hear now?
No, I'm gonna just transcribe.
You transcribe it, Kelly, for me? Okay. So just a little bit more about his combat experiences, because he told the one story about 20mm cannon where his buddy was badly injured. If you could tell us a few more about the combat, because the USS Moale was very involved in combat. I looked at the story of the ship and maybe a little bit more combat stories for us.
We would like to hear a little bit more of your combat stories on the USS Moale.
In the combat role, basically we had to learn how to shoot. And I had every third shell was a tracer. So when I would fire 3 shells, there would be a line, and I would be trying to be very careful to make sure that that line was ahead of the approaching Japanese, so that they would run into it. And with the 3 guns firing, there were 3 of the guns on the fan gun. I was the center, and there were the 2 side ones. So we were able to handle most of all the Japanese ships. None of them really got them, except the one when we were leaving at high speed, and they came in and killed about 14 or 15 of my sons, wounded about 30 more, and that's when they killed and wounded, severely wounded my brother.
Other questions?
So, would you repeat what you said at the end about the guardian angel? I didn't catch that, and some of us at the table didn't catch that.
She would like you to repeat about the guardian angel at the very end of the story. Repeat the guardian angel.
The guardian angel. I remember now. The guardian angel.
He said something at the very end, something about guardian angel.
Oh! I used to laugh to myself, Bill, you're being an apprentice guardian angel because of the things that would continually happen to me in a positive way. Now I don't laugh so much anymore because I find that our family in Maryland basically was the owner of about 60 slaves. And when I was going around after the war, instructing school districts about what to do with their federal money, a hand would come up and say, Mr. Dallam, I think we're related. And we were. And we had a meeting then with all the ex-slaves. And there were about 150. And we looked at them, and they didn't look like slaves at all. They were a little overweight, a lot of them had red hair. And it was one of the most fascinating things in my life to know that I was remotely connected to that. Then I found out that that's why we moved from Maryland to Pennsylvania to get away from that family. But my side of the family did not want to have slaves. So with my free time, I used to look up the Dallam name, and I discovered, my God, I'm the 22nd descendant of Thomas Dallam, went over to Spain with Spanish best. For me to get on the shuttle, I had to say to myself, Bill, shut up. Bill, shut up. Shut up. That's the word would come out. So, so basically, the torpedoman handled torpedoes and depth charges, like me, were also covered when that kind of work was going on.
But how many were in the crew?
When that kind of work was going on.
But how many were?
I didn't realize the other one that has to go. And once you fire, that's why we had the call for this and alcohol. Once you fire those torpedoes to the hell, heavy they are. Now that they're loaded, you don't fire them all at once. You say fire one, fire two. And the two racks of torpedoes were 8. And I don't think we fired 8 torpedoes the whole war. The depth charges, we use the depth charges about 7 or 8 times against submarines. Not the torpedoes. The more fight climate patterns. It's a big now. It's for the climate now. And the first is for you have to explode to hit it close to the target. And they would blow up.
Were you a plank holder of your ship? Were you the first crew on your ship?
Yes,
Okay.
we were the first.
I have a question. Did you tell them about Eleanor Roosevelt?
One enough I would tell you that I was really know. When the war was over, basically the Spurs moved in close to an American battleship where the Japanese were going to surrender. Then after that surrender happened, they moved us into port, and the captain said, "We need some volunteers to go ashore to examine the Hiroshima and Nagasaki site. They want to see how much damage was done." This was a lie. They were really doing measures and everything. Well, everybody volunteered. The captain said, "I'm married. You have a sweetheart. I have brothers and sisters. Are your parents alive? And if you would be positive and all that, you could volunteer." It got to me, and I volunteered at first like everybody else. I wasn't even sure. I said, "No, Dallam, I never want to hear Eleanor Roosevelt again." I said, "What?" Apparently, my mother had written, contacted Eleanor Roosevelt saying, hey, we're doing your job as you seamen. Our sons are at war, but we don't know where we are. And apparently Eleanor Roosevelt contacted the captain, and maybe not too favorable a term. Because when he contacted me, he said, Dallam, here's where you're to write to. I'll do that for you. And I did, and I wrote to them. Then he wouldn't let me on, volunteer. Now, for the rest of the volunteers, they went ashore, and I persisted a little bit. And then he said, okay, we need some volunteers because our sailors are going ashore, we don't want to bother the women. I want some of you guys to go ashore and guard the brothels. The next thing I knew, I was carrying a gun, and I was in a brothel. Japanese girls looked at me in complete awe. A very good sailor. But we were able to keep them safe. Because as soon as the Americans came to the brothel and they saw an armed American sailor there, then they changed their plans completely. That's the only really occasion I had to go. And just one of the many wild experiences I've had in my life. But I have learned very quietly to deal with men. I don't ever open my mouth.
Okay, other questions, ladies and gentlemen? I do have some other questions, so I'll bring the microphone over here. Oh, sorry. So, oh, Kevin. Sorry, Kevin. Right up here. Okay, there you go.
Billy, you told me an interesting story about the Philippines. I watched a program on TV the other night with two 99-year-old veterans of the Philippines that ended up at the same retirement home. And I mentioned it to Bill, and he told me a story about a pregnancy in the Philippines. And I wonder if you could tell the group about how you assisted with that pregnancy.
The story about two 99-year-olds in the Philippines and a pregnancy that you assisted with.
Oh, the pregnancy that we assisted. They said to me, Bill, go find some hot water. So I had a bucket, I looked, and all I could find was a native cooking with a pot. I said, when of you speak English yet? Now, can you borrow some of your hot water? And they let me take the hot water off and take it back. And our maid that was with us then assisted in the birth of the child. We stood around and watched. It was just a very different kind of experience. I mean, who gets to watch someone who does his child being born? But we just handled everything, even though we were all armed. And the natives were a little bit cautious with it because they had been abused, of course, by the Japanese. Japanese had evacuated the whole village and left the natives there. And we were sent ashore because of that. And it's always the gunner's mates, the quartermasters, and the torpedomen who were basically assigned to different tasks. For example, when I went to be discharged in New York City and got up to New York City, they said, well, we can't do this right away, Bill. And it'll take a few days. So in the meantime, we want you to go with some other sailors armed because the sailors are taking advantage of the homosexuals in New York City. And we don't want that kind of fighting to go on. So we were assigned to walk up and down New York City for several weeks armed. And particularly if we saw a sailor with someone who looked like they might be a homosexual, then we would stop there and stop that. That was the last strange task After that, I was ready to do anything for anybody about anything. Really kind of amazing.
Other questions, anybody else before we close things up for the night? Other questions?
Yeah, we gotta draw the,
Oh, okay, yeah, do you want to know?
draw the ticket for the lamp. It is 965-128. 965-128. Okay, and don't forget, people have to sign up for that trolley tour. There's limited seats. They're gonna go really fast, so everybody has a paper to hurry up and sign up tonight.
I'm going to turn it over to Chris Huffman, our president. He's going to make a few presentation to our speakers. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much, Bill. Ladies and gentlemen, two more remarks here tonight. So before we close out tonight, I have a few remarks here. Thank you for being here, number one, and a special thank you to Kevin Springman on my left here for driving the speaker tonight, and he's going to drive me home afterwards, of course. Special thank you to our speaker, Bill Dallam, a World War II veteran. Thank you so much, Bill, for sharing your memories, and thank you for your service during World War II. He served in combat, as you've heard, and really grueling experiences. That this ship, if you read about it on Wikipedia or some other source, it had a lot of combat missions, so it was really deep into it, Pacific, off the Iwo Jima, et cetera, and read about it after the meeting if you'd like. So, Bill, thank you so much, and I really enjoyed it, and your notes were great and helped you guide you through some really spectacular things, so thank you so much. So I do want to mention about as Patty mentioned, we've had flyers produced for you guys. There's enough for y'all to take one tonight home with you. At the welcome table where Patty is over there, on the way out the door, please, if you've not already gotten one, please do grab a brochure about the Hershey World War II Trolley Tour. Tickets are available at HersheyHistory.org, the Hershey History Center, HersheyHistory.org, ORG. You can buy tickets, they're available now. And April 25th will be the tour, 10 a.m. tour, 1 p.m. tour, and a 3:30 tour. So whatever fits your schedule that day, we have 3 different identical tours. And so please do join one of those if all possible. And please ask your family and friends if they'd like to join as well. Next month, we'll be pleased to have another World War II veteran, and Robert Garabedian, a World War II P-40 and P-47 fighter pilot. And we're going to welcome him warmly as well next month. And I think that's about all we have to talk about for right now. So I want to thank you all for being here once again, the cold January evening here. Please go home and warm up, and we'll see you next time, March 5th. And thank you so much. If any questions, come up front, talk to our speaker, get a handshake, and